So tonight I've been asked to talk on the Australian market assurance programs for CAE and Johne's disease in goats. Now, Australia is a federation of states and territories, and we've had CAE accreditation schemes in some states for decades. So in Queensland, it's been around for 30-odd years. Many people joined in the 1980s and have kept their certificates going, as you can see. New South Wales has also had a government scheme. Tasmania has had a government scheme that was very popular initially, but later on became very few people were in it. Initially, a lot of people who were selling goats to New Zealand joined the scheme because Tasmania is free of all blue tongue. We have a non-clinical blue tongue virus in northern parts of Australia, but Tasmania is free. And so they were exporting goats to New Zealand. But when that dried up, that market, then the CAE accreditation scheme lapsed because no one was joining it. South Australia had a scheme run by the Breed Society. Western Australia had none. Victoria had none. But CAE was a notifiable disease in Victoria. So altogether, a hodgepodge. So in 2013, a meeting was called of industry representatives and interested veterinarians. I spoke at that meeting and I gave 5 reasons why I thought we should have a national Australian CAE accreditation scheme. The first was that CAE is a risk to Australia's massive sheep industry. Australia is considered free of Maidi Visna because we've never had any clinical cases of Maidi Visna. But as you know, CAE is a small ruminant lentivirus and so is a risk of causing Maidi Visna in our merino sheep. And we export a lot of sheep overseas and that export market would be at risk. The second reason is that the CAE virus is like the HIV virus, and there could be possible consumer backlash because of consumer concerns. And these are not without some justification. There is a paper that will be mentioned in my conference proceedings that showed that children that were given CAE positive goat's milk did actually seroconvert to the AIDS virus or HIV. And therefore, there might be some consumer concerns that the CAE virus could actually jump species into humans, and that would put at risk the market for goat milk and goat milk products. The third reason is, of course, animal welfare. CAE is a terrible disease, causes deformities, arthritis, severe pneumonia, the clinical mastitis, sometimes rarely encephalitis, and there's no treatment and no vaccine. The fourth reason is that eradication programs are progressing overseas, and look at the progress that Switzerland has made. Now, no clinical cases, and they're just trying to eradicate the very last serological positives. Norway has completely eradicated both CAE and Johne's in their goat herds. And CAE is a disease that's mainly confined to dairy goats in Australia, and therefore is a risk to the meat and fibre goat industries. In America, it has already spread to the boar goats and to fibre goats in America. We don't want that to happen in Australia. But it took almost 10 years before we had a market assurance program that covered CAE. The market assurance programs cover 3 components. The first is compulsory, and that's general biosecurity. Then you have the CAE map or market assurance program and the Johne's map. Now, we've had a Johne's map for a long, long period of time, at least 10 to 15 years. But it's never been all that popular. So we're hoping that this now 3 components will see more people join the schemes. So the basic requirement for the goat biosecurity map is that all individual goats must be permanently identified. You must provide the details of your PIC, which is your property identification code, name and address for the database, but there is an application that you can apply for exemption from the public database. Then there's the basic biosecurity plan that must be in place and an agreement with your veterinarian. Basic records must be kept. All members of Meat and Livestock Australia or Livestock Production Assurance Scheme were given a record-keeping booklet, which would go a long way to keeping the records that are needed. There must be a property risk assessment done by the veterinarian, and that looks at boundary fences and barriers, the goat handling facilities, are they adequate enough? The animals and activities of neighbouring properties, including potential for physical contact, the sites where potentially contaminated water or feces could enter, and previous grazing history of that land. So photos are suggested to record the boundary fences, describe all the animal species on neighbouring properties and on this property, look at barriers to the entry of contaminated water and feces, describe the ferals that can access that property and the risks they pose. Fortunately, feral goats were surveyed, admittedly decades ago, but no serological evidence was found for CAE in our feral goat population. Yards and races are adequate for their use, and they're not used by an eligible species of lower status. So you can't have sheep, for example, or cattle using the same yards as the goats. Then there must be an agreement with the vet where the goat owner must provide past laboratory tests and any relevant history of the goats, have all the goats identifiable, so that's a tattoo or tags with numbers as well as the property code. Present all eligible goats for testing, so that's all goats for over 3 months of age for CAE and over 12 months for Johne's. And if any goat tests positive, then there must be a follow-up test. So a positive ELISA could be a false positive, and therefore it needs to have a fecal test to confirm, and that's generally a fecal culture. The owner must agree to only ever sell any positives that come up on the tests to either slaughter or with full disclosure to the new purchaser. And I recommend that they get a goat health statement that's signed by both parties. The owner must notify the vet within 7 days of any goats with clinical signs of CAE or Johne's. And the department must be notified of any confirmed cases. There must be records kept of all movements, and that's a requirement anyway. And these must be provided to any auditor. And if the property loses their market assurance program status, they must surrender any certificate to the veterinarian. Now, there are a range of forms associated with the 3 goat maps. These goat maps have a range of optional forms, but basically these 4 forms are what's mandatory. There must be an agreement between the herd owner and the approved veterinarian, and there must be a document control register, and this just says where key documents are held. And so this is things such as laboratory test results, the agreement between the herd owner and the vet, the risk assessment, and also the current versions of the market assurance program manuals. Then the veterinarian will do a review checklist and report at each annual visit, and there may be, if needed, a corrective action and improvement report, but only if needed. So these are the 4 mandatory forms. Now, for CAE, there are 2 levels. So you can have an MN1, which is monitored -1, and the X is the year where that comes into force. So basically, there's 2 negative tests of all animals over 3 months of age, and by an improved ELISA test, either individual or pooled milk or blood samples. And these must be at least 6 months and no more than 18 months apart. So that's one method. There is also a bulk milk test method via a vat milk ELISA test, but only for dairy goat herds. You can't do that for other types of herds. So with the bulk milk tests, there must be 4 negative tests 6 to 9 months apart. And during that time, the vet will make the 12 monthly visits. So that gets you to monitored negative level 1. To get to monitored negative level 2, you need another negative test of all the animals over 3 months of age, either individual or pooled milk or blood samples, 6 to 12 months after that preceding test. Or you can have double the number of bulk milk tests. So that's 2 negative bulk milk tests. For Johne's disease, there are 3 levels of testing. So if you have 1 negative whole herd test, either by blood ELISAs or pooled fecal cultures, then they gets you to Johne's MN1. Then 2 years later, you can have another whole herd test, either blood ELISAs or fecal cultures. And another 2 years, you can then have another whole herd blood test or pooled fecal culture test, and that will give you level 3 status. So let's have a look at that in flowcharts. So if you're non-assessed, you have an annual vet review. This is where you sign the agreement. At that same time, you can do a whole herd test with blood samples taken. And then 6 to 24 months later, a second whole herd blood test, and that gets you to level 1. The alternative pathway is 4 bulk milk tests over a period of 24 to 36 months. So it does take you longer, and there's 4 tests. If you've got a positive herd, first of all, the positives must be removed. Then you have to have corrective actions, and 6 months later, you can then join with your first agreement with your veterinarian. So gets you to CAE monitored -1 status. To get to monitored -2, which is the highest level, it's another whole herd blood test or 2 bulk milk tests. And in between that, don't forget the annual veterinary review and checklist. And that's needed to get to the highest level. So that's CAE. For yonis, if you've lost the status or become infected, you may not be eligible. So possibly you can then go forward if the goat map coordinator has been contacted for advice. They may say yes, they can progress if they've done some corrective actions. If there's suspect, then the veterinarian has to ensure all entry requirements have been met. So the goat biosecurity map must be done. Then the whole herd management plan and the first test is done. And if negative, they can go accepted for entry. So with the Johne's test, basically year 0, you do the check tests. Then year 2, you do another whole herd test. Year 4, another whole herd test to get to the highest level. So some thoughts about the blood tests, some rules. If you're vaccinating with goatvet, and some of the larger commercial herds are vaccinating, then you can't use blood tests, which is unfortunate because for CAE, most people are using a blood test. Remember that the blood sample can't be taken within 4 weeks of kidding, so either side of kidding. So 4 weeks to the due date or 4 weeks after kidding, before you can't do a blood test. You must keep the sample upright until clotted, and then only chill once it has been clotted. So all goats over 3 months must be tested for CAE and over 12 months for Johne's. In the old scheme, you also had to wait 4 weeks after vaccination, but it's not in the new manuals. So we've always had a market assurance program for goats, alpacas and sheep. There used to be one for cattle until the cattle industry withdrew support for it. There you can search for breed, you can search for the status MM1, MM2, MM3 and state, etc. And you'll get a list. You can click on this more information button and that will actually give you a copy of the certificate. With the new 3 maps, there is a new search function. You can put in your postcode, the maximum distance you want to travel, breed, whether they're Johne's status, whether there's CAE status, the state you're in, or you can search for an individual property name or owner name or stud name. So you can do those searches. If you search, I did a search here using Victorian postcode and came up with a certificate, and it gives you the date that they entered. And this is the goat biosecurity program's been completed. Johne's disease, it's monitored -1. CAE monitored -1. And the expiry date is there, and the breed, which is Nigerian dwarf. Okay. So some commonly asked questions. So this is what I get asked by goat owners. So can I still attend shows and stay in the market assurance program? So if the show, the exhibition or the sale venue provides a certificate of compliance with the audit, venue audit, then yes, you can. Or if the housing and hygiene standards have been assessed by the herd manager and approved by the goat veterinarian, then they can attend the shows. So I give guidance to my clients. So I say things like take your own feed, take your own bedding, take your own water bottles, take your own feeders. Some of my clients have a big plastic sheet, which very strong plastic, which they can put up between pens, between their goats and other goats, that stops nose-to-nose contact and also any manure running through the wire between the goat pens. And I'd strongly recommend that. Or if there's enough pens, you just leave a space between your herd and the goats of another herd. So they're the basic requirements. And I say things like never ever use the communal water troughs that are sometimes provided. Always make sure you take your own feed and buckets. The other question I get asked a lot, can I introduce a new buck or doe for herd mating at pasture? So you can, if it's the same or higher level of the market assurance program and there's a negative test in quarantine before joining your herd. So you've got to take a sample and send that for testing. If that comes back negative, then you can introduce that buck. So does the biosecurity plan allow for supervised hand matings? So the manual says, if there's a special mating area that's clean to show venue standards and not in an area grazed by your goats, and the herd is the same or higher MAP status, and you get a copy of the certificate. Remember, anyone can get a copy of the certificate from the public database. Or if the herd is not in MAP, you get a National Goat Health Declaration, which I'll explain in a minute. However, should you? So I have no problems with Johne's disease so long as the mating area is in an area such as a driveway or a concrete shed that's not used by the goats, or a veranda, something like that. Or even the roadside, if so long as the goats don't graze any of the grass that's available there. But should you, for CAE? I don't think you should allow any untested or CAE positive does to be mated by your buck. Does in estrus have a lot of vaginal mucus. The bucks will sniff and lick at that mucus, and that mucus is full of white blood cells which potentially have the CAE virus. So on my website, which is www.goatvetoz, goatvetoz.com.au/CAE. There's a paper there you can download. It's very well referenced, and that shows that the bucks, I believe, are at high risk. Does that are mated by positive bucks are very, very low risk of passing that on, but bucks, I believe, are too high risk. So what's this Goat Health Declaration? So in Australia, this is considered like if you're buying a used car, you would get a mechanic to check it out and get a roadworthy certificate or a report from the mechanic. So this is similar. It's not compulsory, but you'd be silly if you're going to buy an expensive animal or an expensive car if you didn't get one. So it has several components, obviously the property identification code. So that's where you're getting the goats from, the number of goats, breed, sex, etc. Then there's a section on Johne's disease, which gives you a score. It just says, are the goats born on this property? What's their rating? Have they been in any animals been introduced to that property in the last 2 years? And are they from a goat map flock? There's questions about foot rot. There's questions about caprine arthritis and cephalitis, if they're accredited, if they're had a whole herd negative test in the last 90 days or the last 12 months. Then there's questions about lice, questions about recent treatments, and then it's signed. And this is a legal document, so it has some standing. This is the risk rating. So obviously, an animal which is in MM3 gets the highest number of points. And if they're infected or suspected to be infected, they get a 0 point. Then you've got this section B. So it's not in MAP, but they've had a check test in the last 12 months. They might be vaccinated with goatvet, or they might have their kids reared under the nationally approved and independently audited kid rearing plan. And so you get a score. Sorry. You add those scores together to get your assurance rating. So what happens at the annual review with your vet? You and your vet go through a check mark and mark each point as either compliant or needing improvement or not applicable. If it's not applicable, you add your initials and the date. So there's a section there about strays or neighbours' animals. Then if you don't have any susceptible animals on your neighbours, then you'd put that not applicable and you'd initial and date that. The annual review checklist covers record keeping, so the vet must look at the records that have been kept, herd entry and property risk assessment, has there been any changes, any new livestock introduced, movement of those assessed animals. So you remember, if you're introducing livestock, if you introduce goats, it's got to have a negative test while it's in quarantine. Check that livestock are being identified, either tattooed or an ear tag. There's a herd management plan still in place and testing has been done and the results kept. So what would it mean if you fail the annual review meeting? So you will fail if you don't have a copy of the 3 manuals, and that's easily overcome because I email links to those 3 manuals before I come for the annual visit. And so therefore the document register can say the manuals are in the email unless they've saved them to their C drive or something like that. They have a herd management plan in place, and that's again easily done because we will email last year's plan. And then we have a herd and property risk assessment that the veterinarian completes, and that again is emailed. You will fail if you've falsified records or you refuse to be audited. Herds where there's a critical defect is found are automatically suspended until a corrective action report is completed. So if you need more information, you can get it from the Animal Health Australia website. So it's there for you there, and just look for Goat Map. On my website, I have pages on CAE and Johne's. I also have a YouTube channel, just search for goatvetoz, where I have lectures on both CAE and Johne's, and also interviews with people who have successfully eradicated CAE from their dairy goat herds. And I also recommend the CAE report project that was recently completed. And these are, that last one will be in the conference paper. So this is a copy of my YouTube channel, and you'll see here I have some videos about the CAE Market Assurance Program. I also have a Facebook page called Eradicate CAE and Goats. So I started off as in Australian goats, but now it's got a global following. I also have a CAE Pinterest board where I have pinned research articles and useful websites and lectures where you can click on those and we'll take you to the relevant pages. Okay, that's the end of the question, and stop the recording.